Hello! In today's tasting, I'd like to look at what is the first vintage for Chateau Montlabert in its new rating as Saint Emilion Grand Cru Classe. It was upgraded in the 2022 reclassification, having previously been a Saint Emilion Grand Cru. Now I should say it's not the first time I've looked at this wine. I made a tasting of this for the Winesuitcase YouTube channel almost exactly a year ago, back in October 2024. So it will be interesting to see if the wine has changed. I suspect it may have closed up a little. Now, the classification system in Saint Emilion was initiated in 1955, so 100 years after the Chateau of the Medoc had been classified. The Saint Emilion classification system classifies wines as Saint Emilion Grand Cru or Premier Grand Cru Classe, and the Premier Grand Crus are split into two classes, A and B. Now, unlike the Medoc system, which is pretty much fixed, the classification system of Saint Emilion is theoretically reviewed every 10 years, allowing estates to either be promoted or to be demoted. And as a result, the classification system has seen quite a bit of controversy, particularly in 2006, when, as a result of the declassification of several chateaux, there was a court case and the reclassification was overturned. Now, the 2012 classification again saw people in court. On this occasion, Hubert de Bouard, a prominent producer and wine consultant from the Saint Emilion region, who had links at the time with Chateau Montlabert, was found guilty of and was fined as a result of the conflicts of interest that resulted from his owning and consulting to properties that were being promoted in the system. Evidently, he was seen as unduly using his influence on the local and the international classification bodies to have these changes made in favour of estates he was associated with. And then to cap that off, the 2022 classification saw several of the major estates that had long been classified as Premier Grand Cru Classe A, the likes of Ozone, Angelus and Cheval Blanc, withdraw from the classification system as a result of disagreements with the criteria for judging it. Throughout this period, Hubert de Bouard was consulting to Chateau Montlabert. So as a taste, perhaps there is a case for considering how justified Montlabert's elevation has been to this Grand Cru Classe status. Also, this is the fifth of the 6 bottles that I brought back with me from the UK to New Zealand in my VinGardeValise. Now, I've tasted 4 of them already, and I haven't had any problems with those. I doubt there will be a problem with this one. However, as I've said before, I'd like to see the process to its end, so I'll see if I've got any comments in relation to how well this wine has travelled. Anyway, to Chateau Montlabert, which is an estate in Saint Emilion making wines that are based on Merlot. And these would be blends with a percentage of Cabernet Franc included. The chateau takes its name from its original owner, Michel de Montlabert, and evidently in 1700 this was a hunting lodge. And today it's certainly one of the more picturesque chateaux that you'll find in Saint Emilion. When I was there earlier this year, they had beautiful wisteria flowers out all along the front of the estate. It looked really lovely. Now, in its recent history, the estate was purchased in 2008 by Castel family estates, and their portfolio includes about 20 French wine estates, predominantly in Bordeaux, but also including properties in the Loire and in southern France. Overall, Castel are actually a wine, beers and soft drinks group, and wine-wise they also have very large holdings of vineyards in both Morocco and Tunisia. On taking over the estate, Castel announced that they were going to do everything they could to improve quality at the chateau. And they set about investing to renovate both the chateau and to remodel the vineyards. And one of their first moves was to bring in prominent wine consultant Hubert de Bouard to consult on the winemaking here. His first vintage here was 2009, but he didn't actually have full control of winemaking until 2010. And yes, during his tenure as the wine consultant here, the wine was upgraded in 2022 to the status of Saint Emilion Grand Cru Classe. The main property is located just off the main road running northeast from the town of Saint Emilion, and it's quite near Chateau Figeac, although it doesn't share the same gravel-rich soils that Chateau Figeac revels. There are about 12.5 hectares of vineyard that surround the chateau itself, and of those 9 hectares normally go into this the estate's Grand Vin. Plantings are predominantly of Merlot, which is about 80% of the plantings, and then the remaining 20% is Cabernet Franc. Under Castel's tenure, planting density has been increased here from somewhere around sort of 5,500 to about 7,500 vines per hectare, which is relatively dense planting for Saint Emilion and should help give greater concentration to the wines being produced. The terroir, the soils here, are predominantly sandy with layers of blue clay in the subsoil and in other areas a striated limestone. The vine age of those plots that surrounds the chateau is a quite creditable 35 years, so they're good mature vines, and again should be producing concentrated fruit. The vineyard is divided into 19 separate blocks, and a lot of effort goes into tending each block according to its needs, with the idea of ensuring that the fruit in each block is harvested at optimal ripeness, rather than harvest simply happening when an average optimal ripeness is achieved across all the plots. There is a second wine, but most of that comes off another 10-hectare block that's separate from the chateau in the commune of Saint Christophe des Bardes. Now, the property has achieved Terra Vitis certification, and so that is for sustainability and for environmentally friendly practices. So the sort of things that encompasses is the use of cover crops such as barley and fava beans, with the right crop being selected for each plot to try and fix the right amount of nitrogen when it's ploughed back into the soil. These cover crops help protect the vines. Their presence reduces the amount of tractor work that goes on in the vineyard, helps to aerate the soil, and provides competition to prevent the spread of weeds. There is mechanical management of weeding as well, so I guess hoeing, but they're quite specifically not using herbicides between the rows. These vineyards are very well looked after. In fact, Castel's promotional material suggests that they're treated almost like a garden. And while in some ways that's marketing, I actually think there's some truth in it. They do quite a lot of work, sort of leaf plucking to ensure that the fruit's well exposed. They'll pick off any of the second set fruit which won't be ripe enough, and so if it ends up in the fermentation could actually give underripe flavours. So there is an awful lot of careful manual work going on to improve fruit quality. The winery was completely renovated back in 2019. I think they kept the exterior walls of the old Shy, completely gutted it and replaced it with a state-of-the-art winery. Beautiful light, fabulous airflow and some really up-to-date equipment. A combination of cement and stainless steel tanks, easily monitored temperature control, and the vats that they have are tailored in size to each of the individual plots in the vineyard, enabling them to keep those plots separate through fermentation and maceration. The barrel cellar was, I believe, enlarged and certainly has been divided into zones, one for odd years and one for even years, enabling them to age the wines for longer than 12 months. So I think part of the improvements that have been made is the period of aging in barrel has been extended. They're working very hard in terms of with oak. Evidently they work with 5 different coopers, and they're using a spectrum of toasting between medium and high toast, and they talk about using 10 different styles of barrel. So I think there's quite a lot of experimentation going on there just to see exactly what works best and to enable them to give different characteristics to different plots by those means. Now, to talk about this wine, 2022 was a warm, sunny vintage. As a result, harvest came quite early, starting with Merlot on the 17th of September, and then with all the Cabernet Franc picked before the end of September by the 28th. The result of this is a wine with concentrated tannins, but tannins that are ripe and smooth. Hopefully we'll see that. Now, picking here was done entirely by hand, and the fruit was picked into shallow trays with the idea that that prevents the weight of the fruit on the top from crushing the fruit at the bottom, and so stopping any oxidation from happening before the fruit reaches the winery. They're very particular in terms of sorting the fruit. It's sorted 3 times, they say. Once on the vine, second time on the bunch at the winery, and the third time after destemming, when optical sorters are used to reject any berries that are underripe, damaged, the wrong size, or with insufficient colour. As I say, fermentation was done entirely by plot in stainless steel and concrete temperature controlled fermenters, and they used a balance of different approaches to extraction. There were pump overs, there were push downs, and there were rack and returns used. all just to manage the amount of perfume, colour and tannin that was being pulled from the wine. Once fermentation was complete, the wine was left in tank for a period of 7 days, with the idea that that allowed some of the tannins to polymerize, i.e. for the solids in the wine to form larger molecules, and that gives a softer, richer texture to the wine. I talked about quite a lot of care being used as far as the oak treatment was concerned. We're told all the wine underwent malolactic conversion in new barrels, and what that can do is that can help to marry the oak and the fruit at an early stage. It gives the wine quite a plush texture. Aging went on in French oak barrels, of which 50% were new. And yes, the new aging regime, now that they have the new cellar, is to mature the wine in barrel for 14 months prior to bottling. The blend for 2022 was quite close to the cepage in the vineyard. There was 75% of Merlot went into the wine, with 25% of Cabernet Franc. So let's have a look at it and see what we make of it, shall we? I should say I decanted this about 2 hours ago, not because I thought there would be a sediment, but just because as a young wine, I wanted a chance to get as much air into the wine as possible. So looking at it, it's a deep, dark ruby red that's not quite opaque. I can just about see the stem of the glass as I look down through it, but really only just. Now, looking at the wine, it's clinging quite readily to my glass there. There seems to be a fairly thick constituency to the wine, and that's not surprising given that it's labelled as having 14.5% alcohol. So that amount of alcohol and also plentiful ripe tannin, I'm expecting the wine to be quite full-bodied. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? There are some quite contrasting aromas of red fruit. One is a lifted, youthful, quite perfumed red plum note. Behind that, however, there are some richer notes, hints of prune, almost to a sort of a curranty, high ripeness level. There are perhaps some hints of cedar sitting behind the fruit, but the fruit is rich enough and it's masking most of it. You just sort of see some slightly high-toned, almost sort of cinnamon or nutmeg notes coming over the top of it there. It's quite an attractive nose with some nice richness and hinting at some good structure. So let's see what it tastes like, shall we? Considering the richness and ripeness I've detected on the nose, and that I know this is going to have quite, yes, there is quite a rich warmth to the back palate. It's a really nice surprise. Actually, the first thing you notice is lovely fresh acidity. And that actually means that initially the wine only seems as if it's sort of medium bodied. It's quite lively. The fruit that I'm being shown is quite a soft, lifted red fruit. While I might make allusions to sort of strawberries, it's much more in a sort of a sharp, fresh, perfumed red plum sort of note. It's quite clearly defined and that's very attractive. I'm not really seeing the notes of prune or raisin that I was picking up on the nose. There are some richer chocolatey notes, and with that there's some quite well integrated touches of vanilla and cedar, and they're sitting more on the back palate together with some perhaps nutmeg and cinnamon spices again, and the warmth from the alcohol. It's an interesting contrast actually, because the acidity is much more noticeable on the front of my tongue and the alcohol and the richness at the back. Perhaps that demonstrates how, while it's young, this wine's elements aren't quite married on the mid-palate. Having said that, the flavours are lasting well. The finish is clearly helped by the fact that there is this lovely fresh acidity buoying it up to the end. And those initial pure perfumed red fruits continue to be there, but they're slowly being enveloped by more sort of rich, dark red cherry and chocolate and perhaps hints of coffee notes. And all those deeper, richer fruit elements are harmonising at the back of the palate along with the structure and giving the wine a nice, long, balanced finish. The intensity of the fruit is such that although the wine has 14.5% alcohol, it seems generous and rich rather than seeming out of balance as a result. The acidity is giving it some life, it's stopping it from closing up and it's stopping it from being impenetrable. I haven't really talked about the tannins. They're medium to full-bodied. I have mentioned cedary notes, but they're not particularly tightly structured. There is a structure to the finish, and it may be drying it out ever so slightly, but any astringency there is being balanced by ripe fruit. And the combination of that is just enough to give a lingering, mouth-watering sensation to the finish. Perhaps the finish is still a little closed at the end. I've seen a drinking window suggested for this wine starting in 2027 and going on to 2034. To my mind, that seems about right. Because although the wine has richness, concentration and good acidity, it doesn't seem to have a firm structure for long aging. I'm sure its concentration and freshness will see it out to sort of 10-12 years of age. And I wouldn't be surprised to see it aging gracefully slightly beyond that. But I don't think this is a wine for long cellaring. I think it's a wine that, given another couple of years just to open up and to marry, will provide some really lovely mid-term drinking. With regard to its classification as a Saint Emilion Grand Cru Classe, I think I can see in the glass a lot of the hard work that I've detailed in terms of the concentration of the fruit coming off densely planted plots and older vines. Certainly I think there's a harmony to the wine that indicates that it's seeing longer aging and it's being very carefully handled. This is a wine that, although it may not be the most elegant Saint Emilion, certainly seems to me to have earned a place in the ranks of the Saint Emilion Grand Cru Classe. And I think it's fair to say that there has been one aspect of the classification system for Saint Emilion that's been a real benefit. I think they've made the criteria for promotion to a higher rank much clearer to estates. And while wine quality is still the key to promotion, they've also made it clear that estates have to be able to have visitor facilities, car parks. Now, while these shouldn't be the primary reasons for an estate being upgraded, it does mean that ambitious chateaus are quietly transforming Saint Emilion into a much more accessible place for wine lovers to visit. And if you get the chance to go to Chateau Montlabert, it really is a beautiful place with a wonderful modern winery that's making some very lovely wines. Now, that having been said, I looked at the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this wine, as I normally do, and I noticed that currently this vintage has a score of 91 out of 100. Now, when I looked at this a year ago, the same vintage had a score of 90 out of 100, and I think I said I agreed with 90, but actually might have given it a 91. So I'm quite happy with that either way. But I think it does show that the Wine Searcher aggregated critic scores can change occasionally. So it is a marking system. I have to say, I can see nothing that suggests to me that this wine has suffered as a result of being transported from the UK to New Zealand over the course of a day or so on a couple of flights via Dubai. There's been no seepage, the cork wasn't protruding, the cork hadn't been sucked in, there was no damage to the label. I think any differences I see between this wine now and when I looked at it a year ago are down to the fact that actually the wines of Bordeaux will close up at around this stage of about 3 years of life. It'll probably take a couple of years to open up again. Thankfully, this is quite an accessible wine. It hasn't been too brooding and it's still been enjoyable. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this tasting. Thank you very much for joining me. If you have enjoyed it, it would be fantastic if you would press the like button. That really does help us to get these videos more widely seen and recognised on YouTube. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, it would be great if you think about passing it on to them. I'd really appreciate that endorsement coming from you. If you haven't subscribed, do please sign up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Again, that will help the channel grow. And do set yourself an alert and make sure that you're notified every time I publish a new tasting so that you don't miss those. I will, of course, leave a link to the Wine Searcher website so that you can follow that and you can see if the wine's available in your market and if so, at what price. And you can see quite a lot of background information about the wine and how it's made there. So thank you once again for joining me, and I do hope that maybe you'll make the time and come and join me for another video tasting in the very near future. But until then, bye for now.